It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. Our top story. We shall respond. President Biden says America's heart is heavy after 3 U.S. troops are killed in a strike blamed on militants backed by Iran. The drone attack follows this one launched against a UK warship by Houthi rebels, also supported by Iran. President Biden's political opponents are urging action. Also tonight, the victims in a space they should have felt safe in. The evidence of serial sexual assault, abuse and harassment in mental health care.
In the 12 hospitals that I was in probably 10 of those, there always felt like there was the potential for that threat to happen. And I experienced a lot of physical violence, a lot of sexual violence.
Putting the post office on notice, the business secretary confirms she did fire its chairman. The search for suspects in the fatal stabbings of 2 teenagers on a Bristol street. Turning the clock back, the return of football violence at an FA Cup derby. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30. Good evening. America's heart is heavy, President Biden said tonight as he confirmed U.S. troops have been killed in the Middle East for the first time since the war in Gaza began. 3 died in a drone attack in Jordan. 34 more were injured. Those responsible were radical Iran-backed militant groups, the president said. And it followed a weekend when the Iran-backed Houthis continued their campaign against shipping in and around the Red Sea, including targeting a British naval vessel. Well, the troops died last night in an attack in the northeast of Jordan near the border with Syria. The exact location of the strike is disputed between the Americans and Jordanians, but it is believed to have happened in an area called Tower 22, where around 3,000 U.S. troops are stationed. Our U.S. correspondent Martha Kellner reports.
President Biden is on the domestic campaign trail in South Carolina, a rematch with Donald Trump looming. But foes further afield are now his focus. He'll return to Washington to one of the defining decisions of his presidency, how to react to an attack America says was at the very least backed by Iran.
We had a tough day last night in the Middle East. We lost 3 brave souls in an attack on one of our bases.
Yes.
And I'd ask you for a moment of silence for all 3 of those fallen soldiers.
Jesus.
And we shall respond.
The drone strike hit here, a US outpost called Tower 22, close to the Jordan-Syria border. The explosion killing 3 American troops and injuring 34 while they slept in their tent. It is the first time US soldiers have been killed by enemy fire in the Middle East since the war in Gaza began. Already a precarious situation, this is a clear escalation.
As pointed out, Iran has cultivated relationships with a number of the militia and extremist groups in Syria, Iraq, and other areas as a way to put pressure on regional adversaries as well as on the United States. So the big question, I think, for the White House is whether or not this is an Iranian-supported group or whether it was an Iranian-directed attack. But in either way, I think there are going to be consequences.
There have been at least 150 attacks on US and allied forces by Iran proxies since October. This video shows the British warship HMS Diamond destroying attack drones from the Iran-backed Houthis overnight. But the death of US troops is different. It lights the touch paper. And from the political aisle, President Biden being criticised forcefully. In a statement, Donald Trump wrote, 3 years ago, Iran was weak, broke and totally under control. This attack would never have happened if I was president, not even a chance. On X, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham wrote, hit Iran now, hit them hard. But a strike inside Iran would have enormous implications, almost certainly sparking a wider regional conflict. For President Biden, the pressure is building.
And Martha joins me live now from the United States. And Martha, we heard President Biden say there, we shall respond, but he's got a very big decision to make tonight, doesn't he?
Yeah, he's around 2 hours from landing in Washington, D.C., and the moment couldn't be bigger for him, a huge decision. I should say there were 2 US Navy SEALs declared dead in a mission to try and intercept Iranian weapons that were heading for the Houthis. That happened last week, but this is a completely different ballgame. A strike, enemy fire, killing US troops in what they say is inside Jordan, inside an allied country. That completely changes the complexion of this conflict. For so long, the US and UK have been claiming that it is possible to contain this conflict, that it won't spill over the borders, that this Gaza war won't become a bigger thing. Well, I think this makes clear that that is now almost impossible to do so. It's a massive headache for President Biden that he doesn't need. He's about to enter into an election campaign, almost certainly against Donald Trump. There are domestic issues mounting for him with the economy, with the border. And now you have Donald Trump saying that President Biden needs to act forcefully in response to this attack that the US say is Iran-backed. Well, previously, Donald Trump has been saying that President Biden is a forever wars president, that he is repeatedly getting the US involved in foreign conflicts. So it's a tightrope now that President Biden is walking. He knows that he does have to respond in some measure to this attack, but he wants to try and prevent it from broadening into a bigger conflict.
Our US correspondent Martha Kellner. Martha, thank you. Now, there's supposed to be settings where the vulnerable and the ill are safe, but an investigation by Sky News and The Independent has instead uncovered evidence of nearly 20,000 sexual assaults and complaints of harassment in NHS England mental health trusts. Hundreds of the most serious allegations are not even being reported to police. Our health correspondent Ashish Joshi spoke to one of the victims.
I'm supposed to be being cared for, and actually I'm just being traumatised.
Alexis had only just become a mum when her younger brother Josh suddenly died. Struggling to cope, she asked her GP for help, but her autism was misdiagnosed, and a psychiatric referral led to 3 years of being locked away from her daughter. While in care, Alexis says she was the victim of repeated sexual assaults.
I was the only female in a ward of 18 men. You'd think that you'd fight. You know, I'm a 6'1" woman. I had this sense that, oh, if that had happened, I would have fought. But you are so terrified.
You're paralysed with fear.
Completely powerless.
Freedom of information requests made by Sky News and The Independent have discovered since 2019 there were nearly 20,000 new sexual assaults and harassment complaints involving patients and staff across more than 30 NHS trusts. There have been more than 800 sexual assaults or rape allegations involving women across more than 20 trusts, with only 95 cases believed to have been reported to the police. And over 500 allegations of sexual assaults or rape on mixed-sex wards or mixed spaces across more than 20 trusts.
Have you been shocked or surprised even by the scale of the abuse?
In the 12 hospitals that I was in probably 10 of those, there always felt like there was the potential for that threat to happen. And I experienced a lot of, physical violence, a lot of sexual violence.
We asked all NHS mental health trusts in England to provide evidence that they are applying government-backed sexual safeguarding protections. Only 6 provided this information.
60 to 80% of people who end up as an inpatient in a psychiatric hospital have either experienced sexual abuse or sexual violence already. When that kind of incident is occurring on a psychiatric ward where you should feel safe, you are re-traumatising people.
Kenton Medway NHS Trust has apologised to Alexis for the unacceptable behaviour she experienced in their care. They told Sky News, over the last 10 years, we have made improvements to the quality of care we deliver including eradicating mixed-sex wards and significantly reducing our use of restrictive practices. NHS England says it has advised all trusts and local health systems to appoint a domestic abuse and sexual violence lead to support patients and staff to report incidents. But Alexis says change needs to happen quicker.
Nothing's changed and nothing's going to change unless significant action's taken.
Ashish Joshi, Sky News in Kent.
Well, in response to our report, a government spokesperson said sexual violence or misconduct of any kind is unacceptable and has no place in the NHS. And NHS organisations have a responsibility to protect both staff and patients. We are working closely with the NHS to ensure anyone receiving treatment in a mental health facility receives safe, high-quality care and is looked after with dignity and respect. And if you scan the QR code on your screen right now, you can listen to more from Patient 11, Sky News and The Independent's new investigative podcast telling the story of one young mother's escape from a hospital and the issue of sexual assault in NHS mental health care. All episodes are available now wherever you get your podcasts. Police in Bristol are searching for suspects in the murder of two teenagers who were stabbed late last night. The boys, aged 15 and 16, died in hospital. Our correspondent, Sadia Chowdhury, is in Bristol tonight. So, Sadia, what more do we know about what happened?
Well, look, the police haven't named the boys, but the local community know who they are. And tonight they came out, maybe about 150 to 200 people, to have a vigil and lay flowers. One person told me that the local florist has run out of bouquets. They came out to show their solidarity to the families affected by this. A 15-year-old boy and a 16-year-old boy, as you say, who died in the early hours of this morning. It's believed they were attacked by a group of people who then fled in a car. And just a few yards away from what is now a crime scene, there's a knife surrender bin, efforts by the local community to try and curb violence in that particular area. And also bleed kits, so that anyone who does witness an attack like that can offer some assistance. But eyewitnesses have told us today that there was no time to go and look for any bleed kits. One person said that she heard a noise, she came out and she saw one of the boys walking towards her before he collapsed on the ground. Have a listen to the latest from Avon and Somerset Police.
The boys' families have been informed of the arrests and we will continue to support them and update them on the investigation using our specially trained family liaison officers. A large cordon is in place on Ilminster Avenue whilst crime scene investigators examine the scene and other officers carry out inquiries, including house-to-house inquiries and the collection of any CCTV footage.
Well, a 44-year-old man and a 15-year-old boy have been arrested and remain in custody, and more suspects are sought, and a murder investigation has been launched.
Sadia Chowdhury with the latest on those stabbings in Bristol. Sadia, thank you. A senior government minister confirmed today that she sacked the chairman of the post office, saying it was her job to intervene if the system isn't working. Kemi Badenoch said the post office's problems go way beyond the wrongful prosecutions of hundreds of sub-postmasters in the Horizon scandal. Our political correspondent Tamara Cohen has more.
She sacked the chair of the post office on Saturday afternoon as the full horror of the Horizon scandal continues to unfold. But what was the final straw?
Given everything that has happened this year, I think we need someone new who can deal with these issues in a different way. The wrong thing to do would be to sit back with that bureaucratic indifference that we often see across systems and say, oh, well, he's only been there for a year. Let's hope things just get better. I see it as my job to intervene if I don't believe that the system is working. And that is exactly what I have done.
Henry Staunton was only appointed a year ago after a long career in business. Disagreements over how the post office is governed, not related to Horizon, have dogged his time in office.
This decision follows various tensions with ministers, including over bonuses paid to post office executives cooperating with the Horizon inquiry. The post office is government-owned, and the business secretary didn't rule out other senior figures being shown the door.
It's cold comfort for former branch manager Damien, who was jailed after being wrongfully convicted of theft and still hasn't been compensated.
It's not just the fault of him, it's systematic failures they've got there. And it's not just down to the one man, it's the way they have been run, the way they're continually run. It has severely diminished my ability to get a decent job.
There's no firm deadline for compensation being paid.
What's really important now is the government doesn't leave the post office rudderless, and nor can ministers just dodge the responsibility for actually getting the money out of the door.
A new leader will now handle the fallout from this huge miscarriage of justice and the hundreds of victims who already feel they've waited too long. Tamara Cohen, Sky News.
Divisions are growing in the international community over the funding of the United Nations aid efforts in Gaza. A senior aid official told Sky News that the decision by America, the UK and other countries to pause payments was outrageous. It follows allegations that 12 UN workers were involved in the October 7th attacks. Our international affairs editor Dominic Waghorn reports.
The news has sent shockwaves across the region and through the international aid community, the biggest relief organisation in Gaza, to lose funding for now at least from its biggest donors, Britain included. Veteran aid workers in the Middle East say it's unacceptable.
Don't undermine the organisation that is the vital lifeline for all of Gaza. None of us other organisations can have any capacity to substitute them. Come to your senses. Continue aid to UNRWA.
Fleeing Israeli forces in the background, another exodus of Palestinians on the move south in Gaza over the weekend. Among them, deep shock too about the news.
That will be a big disaster for everyone in Gaza. Without support from the international community, we won't be able to survive.
What have the civilians done to deserve this? What have the children, babies and elderly people done to be penalised this way?
UNRWA has provided aid, shelter and education to refugees from Israel's wars with Palestinians since 1949. But Israeli intelligence agencies are believed to have told the agency they believe a dozen of its workers were in some way involved, it's not clear how, with the atrocities of October the 7th, in which 1,200 Israelis were killed. Of the 12 people implicated, the UN Secretary-General says in a statement over the weekend, 9 were immediately identified and terminated by the Commissioner-General of UNRWA, Philippe Lazzarini. 1 is confirmed dead, and the identity of the 2 others is being clarified. The Palestinian Prime Minister accused Britain and others cutting off the UN relief agency of colluding with Israeli efforts to expel Gazans from Gaza.
The suspension of aid is in line with the Israeli plans for the forced evacuation of our people from Gaza into Egypt.
On Friday, the International Court of Justice ruled the situation in Gaza is catastrophic and getting worse, and all parties must act urgently to prevent it deteriorating. The move to suspend funding from UNRWA does not help efforts to meet that binding resolution. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News.
Islamic State have claimed responsibility for an attack in Istanbul where 2 masked men attacked a church, killing 1 person during a Sunday service. The Interior Ministry confirmed the attack took place at the Santa Maria Church in the Sarıyer district late this morning. It's not yet known what type of weapons were used or if anyone else was injured. Climate change activists have thrown soup at the Mona Lisa in the Louvre in Paris. 2 women from the protest group Food Response managed to get past a barrier which separates the painting from the public. But the artwork is protected by a glass screen and has not been damaged. And the Labour MP, Kate Ossamore, has had the party whip suspended after a post about Holocaust Memorial Day, which appeared to suggest that the conflict in Gaza was a genocide. She later apologised for any offence caused. In scenes that many in English football hoped had been consigned to the past, there were violent clashes today between fans at a West Midlands derby match. 1 man was pictured with blood pouring from a head wound. There were 6 arrests. Our correspondent Fraser Maud reports.
Been a little bit of disorder down in the corner, and it has stopped the game.
After a 12-year wait for fans to see a Black Country derby in the flesh, most will remember this match for all the wrong reasons.
And there does seem to be some quite troubling scenes.
The bitter rivalry between West Bromwich Albion and Wolverhampton Wanderers meant that tensions were high even before the game's early kick-off. Then, just moments after Matheus Cunha scored the 78th-minute goal that would eventually seal victory for Wolves, the tension turned to violence in both home and away stands. Scuffling supporters bundled onto the pitch as those in the stands hurled abuse and missiles at their rivals. As police tried to control the situation, West Brom defender Kyle Bartley could be seen carrying a child to safety in his arms. Several supporters were clearly injured, one with a bleeding head wound, another taken from the pitch on a stretcher. 5 people were arrested. During the chaos, both teams left the field, having to wait almost 40 minutes before it was deemed safe enough to continue. After the game, both managers were left having to talk about the violence rather than the football.
I thought the game was played in a real good spirit, and disappointing that things that went on off the pitch need to obviously now be spoken about and I'm sure looked into.
Totally disappointed against any type of aggressive behavior that happened, that unfortunately have happened. Now we have to be talking about something that, of course, we are against this type of action in football.
The Football Association has released a statement saying the disorder that occurred at the Black Country derby between West Bromwich Albion and Wolverhampton Wanderers is completely unacceptable. Safety and security are of the utmost importance, and the behaviour of those involved is dangerous and inexcusable. West Brom, meanwhile, says it condemns in the strongest terms the unsavoury scenes at the game and will ban any spectators involved. Fraser Maud, Sky News.
Well, it may only be the end of January, but temperatures in parts of the UK today weren't far off the average for the summer. In the village of Kinlochew in Wester Ross in the northwest Highlands of Scotland, they reached 19.6 degrees, which is provisionally a record temperature for the month. The previous UK January record was 18.3 degrees, recorded in Inchmarlow and Aboyne in Aberdeenshire in 2003. Now, this was the scene in Kinlochew's Loch Marie today. For Scotland, it's not just the hottest ever January temperature recorded, but also the hottest winter. In fact, temperatures were so unusually high that a wildfire was set off just 40 miles north in Loch Inver, fueled by wind speeds of up to 65 miles an hour. Hard to believe that it's less than a fortnight since parts of Scotland were suffering a deep freeze, with temperatures as low as minus 14. Sky News understands the King will not return to royal engagements for up to a month as he recovers from treatment for an enlarged prostate. King Charles remains in hospital tonight for a third night of care. Still there, too, is the Princess of Wales, nearly 2 weeks after she was admitted for abdominal surgery. Our royal correspondent, Laura Badenoch, reports.
No royals leaving hospital, but the Queen arrived to visit the King. She's been at his side twice a day since he was admitted on Friday. The King is said to be recovering well after his prostate surgery, but will be off work now for around 4 weeks.
The month is unusual, but the fact that he's staying in longer usually isn't. I mean, with these type of procedures, they are routine, maybe just generally his age and the fact that they need to take care.
There's been a rapid rise in visits to prostate websites after the King shared his diagnosis. Buckingham Palace said he was delighted his health news was having a positive impact. But it does mean we haven't seen much of the royals recently. This was the last public appearance for the King and Kate, leaving an unusual situation. 2 senior royals in the same hospital at the same time, and both out of action.
The King likes to be busy, so won't like the fact he's had to cancel or postpone official engagements for up to a month. He can, though, carry out constitutional duties. I'm told while in hospital, he's still available for state paperwork, and once home, he'll still be attending to his red boxes.
As the King spends his third night in hospital, for Kate, after her abdominal surgery, it's been almost 2 weeks. And her recovery also much longer, most likely still until Easter. Laura Badenoch, Sky News, Central London.
Let's get the latest sport now from Sky Sports News and James.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
Well, Stuart, it's been a few months now since the end of what was an incredible Ashes series. How are you adjusting now to life after playing cricket?
Yeah, really enjoying it. I think ultimately finishing on my own terms was really important for me, and I knew that I wanted to finish by my last ball playing for England. England versus Australia was a major pinnacle for me in Ashes cricket, and it was such a exciting and exhilarating series that I almost got to the stage where I don't know if it gets any better than this, really. So yeah, it was great to be able to sort of make the decision on my own, finish on my own terms, and I don't think it will really properly hit me until the Test team play again, and Jimmy Anderson and Ben Stokes are walking out with an England cap on in their whites. I think that might sort of feel real, that I won't ever do that again. But no, at the moment I've got no regrets and feel really happy.
In the book you spoke about the fact that retirement only really came to you during the Old Trafford tests. So you came to a massive decision quite quickly. Yeah,
within 10 days, I think. So yeah, it was pretty stressful. Ultimately, anytime you walk away from something you love, it's really difficult. And I was loving playing cricket. I was loving working under Stokesy and Baz. It was great fun. I didn't feel much pressure. The communication was really good, and I was bowling really well and felt fit. So a lot of those things would say, carry on playing. And I honestly felt like I could do another couple of years, but I kept sort of bringing myself back to what's my next Everest, what's my next major challenge. I always need a challenge because I've got this goal to always continuously improve. I need something to charge towards and chase. And whenever I've written down in my whole career what's my next Everest, bang, within 30 seconds I've written down and I know what to target, and I just couldn't quite nail something down. So I think that ultimately told me that it was the right time to move and try something different.
The next Ashes 2 years away. Would that have felt too far when you were making that decision a few months ago?
No, I think I'd still be fit and fresh to play, but I know that a young family played a part as well. Annabella's turning 1. The travel's a lot in international cricket, and the young years are so valuable. Ultimately, I'm 37. Next Ashes will be 39, and although I still feel like I'd be able to play, I didn't want to sacrifice some sort of memories and special moments I could share with my family up until then, and because you have to dedicate your life to playing for England. You have to dedicate everything to it, and I'd done that for 17 years, and it's time to still feel very focused on a career, but spend a bit more time at home.
And you bowed out in magical circumstances. Last ball you hit for 6. Last ball you bowled was a wicket. 150 wickets in Ashes cricket. What was it about that series that always tended to get the best from you?
Yeah, great question. I think a lot of it's...
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
And that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's papers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by Stephen Bush, Associate Editor and columnist at the Financial Times, and Kate Andrews, Economics Editor of The Spectator. Welcome both. Among the stories we'll be discussing, this on the front of the FT. Their headline, Iran-backed militants kill 3 U.S. troops in drone attack. We'll be right back.
They locked me up for 3.5 years and were prepared to throw away the key. And within a couple of seconds, there were a number of armed security.
An autism patient's dramatic escape from a secure psychiatric care unit sparks a major investigation.
I was petrified.
Follow Patient 11 wherever you get your podcasts.
Asylum, and I'm Sky's chief North of England correspondent. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news.
This is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. First, though, let's take a look at our top stories. President Biden has said we shall respond after 3 U.S. troops were killed in Jordan in a strike blamed on militants backed by Iran. An investigation by Sky News and The Independent has uncovered evidence of nearly 20,000 sexual assaults and complaints of harassment in NHS England mental health trusts. And breaking news this evening, the government is to announce plans to ban disposable vapes in an attempt to protect young people's health. Former Prime Minister Liz Truss has called it a profoundly unconservative policy. Hello there, you're watching the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with Stephen Bush, associate editor and columnist at the Financial Times, and Kate Andrews, economics editor of The Spectator. Well, let's see what is on some of those front pages. Well, Stephen's paper, the FT, leads with tonight's news from Jordan. And this headline, Iran-backed militants kill 3 U.S. troops in drone attack. The Guardian says the attack has heightened fears of a direct conflict between the United States and Iran. The Metro reports on the fatal stabbing of 2 teenagers in Bristol, latest victims of what it calls the UK's knife epidemic. The Eye claims an exclusive with news that Labour's plans to charge VAT on private school fees could hit deprived children trying to get into state grammar schools. Head teachers are concerned. The Express leads with Cabinet Minister Kemi Badenoch's warning to Tories hoping to topple Rishi Sunak to stop messing around and accept that the Prime Ministers are not disposable. The Mail claims rail bosses have been pocketing big payouts despite failing to stop the recent run of train strikes. And the Star leads with what it calls our balmy weather, an Arctic blast last week and a heat wave this week. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code that you'll see on screen during the program, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Stephen Bush, associate editor and columnist of the Financial Times, and Kate Andrews, economics editor of The Spectator. Welcome both. OK, let's start with a story that we have been talking about here on Sky News as well, front page of the Bristol Post. And it is those stabbings in Bristol. The headline, boys stabbed to death in double murder, front page of the Bristol Post. Stephen, what did you make of it and the coverage?
Well, obviously, it's a tragic and horrible story. The sad thing is it's a tragic and horrible story that feels increasingly familiar. It feels, it feels that every week there's a push notification on my phone about a stabbing, and it clearly is a real and growing problem, but it's, of course, just an awful an awful story and an awful tragedy for those two boys and their families.
And it links, of course, the issue Stephen was mentioning of knife crime that we're seeing.
Yes, in the capital, it's up 22% between 2022 and 2023. There's been a lot of talk in recent days about the kinds of crackdowns that might be implemented to deal with this around zombie knives. Labour's pledging £100 million more to try to tackle the issue of knife crime directly. It raises a lot of important questions we have to ask about criminalization, about how we deal particularly with teenagers who get caught up in gang violence, who get caught up in carrying around knives, and the best way to deal with that between criminalization and rehabilitation and the rest of it. But as Stephen says in this particular story, it's a real tragedy, a 15, 16-year-old boy who've both passed away. There's a man and a teenager in custody at the moment. We don't have the full details about this, but, nothing positive to say, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that it's front page of the Bristol Post, which, of course, you'd expect because it happened in Bristol. But, we haven't seen all of the front pages, but I haven't seen it as one of a big story on any of the other front pages of the nationals. So it's something that, still doesn't get discussed to this level at a national level, perhaps as much as it should.
I think that's an important point. We see it on the front page of the Metro, but as you say, it's missing from a lot of other front pages. And to Stephen's point, the story has become slightly uncomfortably familiar to the point where you hear it and you think again.
Yeah.
And oftentimes that can actually push things down the news agenda rather than raise them up. It's an interesting point about what does get covered.
Stephen, let's go to your paper, the Financial Times. Their front page, Iran-backed militants kill 3 U.S. troops in a drone attack. And of course, this is the breaking news that we had in the past few hours. And we've had reaction from the United States. It's always the same question, the risk of this escalating.
Yeah, in a sense, this story is a sign that escalation has already happened. The key players in this are the Islamic Resistance of Iraq, which is an Iran-backed militant group based out of Iraq. The US has been very reluctant to do anything which would cause it to be in a direct confrontation with Iran. But of course, there's a particular issue in a presidential election year where Donald Trump is effectively saying, not quite in these words, but is essentially saying, well, under me, there would be direct escalation, and that may push Biden into a position where he has to do something and is more escalatory. And, of course, we've got the disruption of shipping caused in part by the fallout of the war between Israel and Hamas. It does feel like it's a major escalation in a conflict which has no end in sight.
And what did you make of it, Kate, also because it's an election year and Biden sort of can't win because, there's this risk of escalation. Israel isn't really listening to America when it gives it some advice, but also America can't seem to contain the situation escalating.
Well, these proxy wars are certainly heating up. I don't think there's any doubt in the U.S. at the moment that President Biden will continue to remain committed and an ally of Israel. But as we're seeing, there are a lot of proxy wars popping up in the process of that. It's not just Hamas's horrible terror attack against Israel, but we now see the Houthis in Yemen responding in the Red Sea. We're now seeing these proxy wars on the border of Syria. We have 3 U.S. troops dead. That does put pressure on President Biden, and he has said that the U.S. will hold all those responsible to account at a time and a manner of our choosing. Yeah. That is de-escalating the situation to some extent. But as Stephen says, he does have President Trump, who is now looking very much to be the nominee, right on his back. And Trump's line is, if it had been me the past 4 years, you wouldn't be seeing any of this. I would have contained it. Now, those are some very big ifs. But Donald Trump will be pointing to the Abraham Accords that he got through when he was president. And it really does put pressure on Joe Biden's foreign policy.
And I have to say, in the past few minutes, we've had reaction from David Cameron. Let me just bring it to you. So David Cameron posted on X in the past few minutes. He said, "We strongly condemn attacks by Iran-aligned militia groups against U.S. forces. We continue to urge Iran to de-escalate in the region. Our thoughts are with those U.S. personnel who have lost their lives and all those who have sustained injuries as well as their families." So, that reaction that we've had there from the Foreign Secretary. OK, let's stay still with the Financial Times. Another story in the front page. EU drafts plan to cripple Hungarian economy if Orban blocks Ukraine cash. Stephen, what's the story about?
So this is a plan that our reporters have got hold of. So the challenge that the EU faces is that essentially on the matter of how to deal with Russia, it's sort of 27 against 1. Hungary is much more pro-Russia than any of the other nations in the bloc. But because foreign policy is still largely a reserved competence, it's one where there's not qualified majority voting, it's done by unanimity. Hungary can and has vetoed many measures than the rest of the bloc would like to do. So this plan is partly a sort of measure of stick to essentially say to Hungary, look, if you don't get on board with the programme, then there are going to be economic consequences for you. But it does reflect the sort of remarkable challenge that Hungary presents to the EU. The EU was able to sort of shrug off the exit of a member in the United Kingdom, but it's much more difficult to deal with a member who's sort of quite hostile to the shared security aims of everyone else around that table in the bloc, and who doesn't want to leave and wants to keep vetoing things. And it doesn't mean drawing up a plan that in many ways goes against the central function and achievement of the EU, which is the spread deepening of free trade and economic integration within the bloc.
Okay. This is a fantastic scoop from the FT that they've seen this document. And as Stephen points out there, the EU is in an incredibly difficult position where it is supposed to be a model of a free trade bloc. You know, its sole purpose, well, once upon a time, actually, not anymore, but once upon a time, its sole purpose was really to advocate and promote free trade. And the fact that you're talking about the centre, Brussels, actively trying to come up with ways that it could hurt one of its members' economies by spooking the markets, creating a run on the country's currency because of a dispute over foreign policy, shows all the ways actually in which the EU really has expanded, and it's made life quite difficult. Now, I think a lot of people would look at Hungary's stance on Russia and its cozy relationship and think that's a terrible position to be in, but you know, it's a terrible line that's being taken by Viktor Orban. But it is remarkable that the EU of all blocs would then be trying to go after one of its own members' economies.
Okay, let's take a look at the front page of the Eye now. Labour private school tax set to squeeze deprived children at some grammar schools. Stephen, this is the kind of thing that, you know, a lot of people feel very passionate about. What's the story and what's your take?
So the story here is one of Labour's very few tax rises that they've enumerated is this change in the taxable status of private schools. So they will face the same tax regime as, you know, private healthcare, any of the other private things you can claim. They will lose that VAT exemption. And now there have been a variety of stories about what this would mean for the rest of the sector. Because, of course, although many people would be able to afford the rise in fees, some people wouldn't. And this story is essentially saying, look, what would happen is this would create pressure on grammar schools that would, you know, push people out, and then this would have the strongest effect on the most deprived. So, I kind of think that this story is almost certainly the latest salvo in the ISC, which is the Independent Schools Trade Association, trying to put the frighteners on this story. They haven't been successful yet. This policy is very popular in the abstract. The question, of course, is will it be popular once it's implemented? I actually suspect that the schools which will be most controversial will not be grammar schools. It will be schools which are providing specialist education for people with specific learning difficulties.
Okay, we have a minute.
Well, look, I mean, Stephen covers it well there. Labour have not wanted to get specific about their tax policy because it's much easier to, you know, hold a popular position when you're not getting specific. This is one area they've been very clear they're going to do, so it's not surprising that there is most scrutiny on it. There have been big questions around whether or not it will raise $1.6 billion. There have been big questions around, as Stephen points out, whether or not it's actually going to create pressures on certain kinds of schools. But what I think we're pretty certain about is Labour is not backing down from this one. They continue to think it's popular. Whether or not it actually raises the money is another question.
Okay. Kate, Stephen, thank you so much. Stay with us. We're going to be looking, of course, at more of tomorrow's papers, including this story on the front of the Express about Cabinet Minister Kemi Badenoch's warning to fellow Tories to stop messing around by hoping to replace Rishi Sunak.
A skin check is something we should all carry out on a monthly basis.
I was going to ask you about it.
Absolutely. So Sarah Ferguson obviously is a type 1 skin type, so she has very fair redhead.
Because she's a redhead. Yeah.
Absolutely, and that puts her in the firing line for melanoma and all types of skin cancer. So really, if you have that skin type, you need to check your skin, not just once a month, but really get to know it. Just putting sunscreen on when you're out and about is absolutely vital. There's a lot of fear around sun protection because people don't want to cover up their skin from that lovely tan that we all think makes us look more attractive. But the fact is that if the UV index is over 2, so if it's, 3, if it's over 3 and over, we need to wear sunscreen from May to October. And that's not just on the beach. You know, sunscreen isn't just for the beach, it's for everyday use. OK, so there is a method called the ABCDE rule, and that basically talks about A for asymmetry, B for border, C for colour or change, E for evolution and D for diameter. So we need to look, basically, to boil this down, we need to look at change. So if we get anything that a mole or a lesion that is changing, bleeding, itching in any format, or if your intuition keeps going back to it and thinks, there is something about that, go and see your GP because early diagnosis is vital. It's not just moles, Kate, it's also lesions. So anything like an area of skin that looks different, a spot that doesn't heal, anything that scabs over, because it's not just melanoma, there's also other types of skin cancer. Basal cell carcinoma, squamous cell, which is the most common cancer in the world, and rates are rising. With melanoma, the recovery rates are good, but as I say, you have to get in there early. So if you're getting there early, you've got a 99% chance of getting over that. But if you're late, the odds go down the further you go down. So obviously it travels down into the lymph nodes, through to your lymph, and then into the rest of your body. And it can turn up anywhere, so we need to get in there much, much sooner. Skin cancer is very common. Melanoma is relatively rare, but it's more dangerous. But we need to protect ourselves, and that's not just, as I say, on the beach. We raise awareness for the Melanoma Fund. We raise awareness in sport and outdoor recreation. So we encourage people that play golf, tennis, cricket. If they're out there for prolonged periods, don't be afraid of sun protection. Slap it on because you're protecting your skin.
Welcome back. You're watching the Press Preview. With me once again are Stephen Bush, Associate Editor and Columnist at the Financial Times, and Kate Andrews, Economics Editor of The Spectator. Okay, let's go to the Daily Express, and a headline here, and a quote from Kemi Badenoch. Stirring Tory plotters must stop messing around. And basically, this is a message to those who insist that she might be a replacement for Rishi Sunak. Kate.
So these comments come after Sir Simon Clarke, former Levelling Up Minister under Liz Truss, called for the Prime Minister to go last week. I think two things are happening here. You have the Trade Secretary on Sky News coming out and defending the Prime Minister, as you would expect from a Cabinet Minister, defending the government, making, I think, the important point that this is not helping the party in the year of an election. But of course, Badenoch's name has been caught up in some of these discussions because she is often touted as a potential leader of the party, whoever may come next. And I suspect that she doesn't want people to think that she herself is plotting. And also, if you do have ambitions to be the next Tory leader and indeed one day Prime Minister, you might not want that switchover to happen so soon with the way that the polls are looking. So you might want to take some more time.
Bit of a poison chalice right now.
I'm not sure Kemi Badenoch or anybody else who might have ambitions would want to see the baton passed to them right now.
Stephen?
Well, I think, these remarks which she made on Sky this morning do show that Downing Street's actually had quite a good crisis in terms of its handling of it, right? What are the things you need to do to hold off a coup? You name the plotters, so you disincentivise other people joining them, and then you get the biggest threat to you in the cabinet, which is Kemi Badenoch, to go around doing the morning round saying she's behind the Prime Minister. So although they still have many, many problems, I think if I were working in Downing Street, I'd feel pretty pleased with myself for how I had contained the threat over the past couple of days.
Do you think she is a possible future leader of the Conservatives?
She polls very well. I know Sky was showing some of that polling earlier on in terms of the grassroots, so it's certainly possible. But to Stephen's point, publicly, she's being very clear about her support from the Prime Minister right now. This is not thought to be at the top of her priority list.
OK. Let's go to The Guardian front page there. Angela Rayner. Rayner, councils fund just a sticking plaster. And this is Angela Rayner accusing the Conservatives of cynically applying a sticking plaster to council finances to get, of course, through to the election. Stephen, what do you make of this?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, it is, if you look at, what the IFG has estimated and what the LGA, the local government, has estimated councils need to get them on a sustainable path, the amount that the government has put forward is not enough. It is, however, enough to mean that the run-up to election day won't be local authorities going bankrupt, having to, raise council tax, do lots of things you wouldn't want to be happening in your closing argument as a government. But, of course, the difficulty for the Labour Party is it's one thing to point out this is a sticking plaster solution. There's nothing in this statement suggesting that the Labour Party would be willing to spend more on the problem. And I think this is going to be the big challenge for them over the next year, is people will listen to their critique of the government and go, yeah, that's fair, but then they'll listen to the alternative, and I think there's still lots of questions about whether or not Labour has really got enough of a plan to tackle some of these problems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's completely right when the Institute for Government is saying that it's going to take £7 billion more in cash to get government funding up to where it was in 2010. The question for the Labour Party is, where is that money coming from? If you agree that that hole has to be filled and that you can't fill it through productivity gains or efficiency gains, as the current government would like to say, it raises big questions for Labour. If you're not going to raise income tax, as they've said, if you're not going to have a wealth tax, as they've said, where are you finding the money? They haven't answered that question yet.
They haven't. Let's take a look at the front page of the Daily Star now. Britain's 19.6 degrees in January, so it's a heat record, days after shivering in Arctic blasts. So this is, in some parts of Scotland, 19.6, and just a few weeks ago it was minus 14. So if you live in that part of the UK, you really don't know what to wear when you leave the house these days. Stephen, I mean, obviously, cold weather we're expecting, but this is unseasonable, to say the least.
Well, this is what some climate scientists call global weirding, right, which is where climate change causes all sorts of strange effects and moves how the Gulf's going, which causes the climate to do weirder things, which causes bits of the harvest to do weirder things. Yeah. And we're kind of living through that right now, this deeply weird, this January where I kind of felt like I've gone into my autumn clothing, I've gone into my winter wardrobe, but some days it's felt I needed to get my summer clothes out, out of a cupboard somewhere. And this is going to be the future from now on, is weirder and weirder weather.
In fairness, the previous record was hit in 2003. So, 20 years ago, I think they went to 18 at a similar time of year. Kate, what do you think?
I think it's also very important for people to remember that while it may be warmer than usual, you still need to bundle up, especially at this time of year. Pressure on the NHS in January and February tends to be heightened, particularly because people get colds. And especially if you're elderly, if you're vulnerable and you're getting cold, don't be deceived by the warmer weather. Make sure that you're taking care of yourself.
I doubt it's going to stay 19 degrees for long. It's probably just a blip and it's all over. Stephen, Kate, stay with us. But now it's time to take a quick look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, low pressure crossing the country tomorrow will result in a dull, wet day for central areas. It will be brighter but colder to the north and mostly cloudy and mild to the south. It'll be a mixed start to the day. There'll be a widespread frost over Scotland and Northern Ireland, but there'll also be plenty of sunshine. The rain through central areas will be heavy and persistent, potentially turning to snow on its northern edge. For southern areas, it will be dull with low cloud and hill fog. There'll be little change through the day, although rain will extend through much of Wales and the southwest, while southern Ireland will become drier. Temperatures will range from single figures in the north to values in the mid-teens in the south. The rain will continue to feed northeast through the afternoon, with showery conditions following.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Coming up next.